Okay, so welcome back to you guys. I'm going to share this next topic with you of what is enlightenment so that you can understand more about this mental state. And that way you'll be able to more easily navigate your way to it. And once you actually attain enlightenment, you'll know that your mind's actually enlightened. But if you didn't know what enlightenment was, you wouldn't be able to navigate your way to it. And you wouldn't know that your mind's enlightened when it was actually enlightened. So I'm going to share this topic with you. And you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions as we go, just like always. The first thing I'm going to share with you guys on this important topic is that it's very challenging for the unenlightened mind to understand what enlightenment is. That if you never had chocolate ice cream before, and I sat here and I described chocolate ice cream to you, you'd have a really challenging time to understand what chocolate ice cream tastes like. The only way you're going to fully understand what chocolate ice cream tastes like is to taste it yourself. So it's the same kind of thing with enlightenment. I can sit here and describe it to you all day long and help you to be able to understand it. And you'll know more about enlightenment after our talk than you do right now. But you're not going to fully understand 100% what it is by the time we're done talking. So just understand that. But as you're making your way closer and closer to it, you'll start understanding it more and more as your mind's starting to experience more and more of the qualities of enlightenment. So feel free to ask any and all questions, but just understand you're not going to understand everything about it by the time you are finished with this conversation. Okay. So enlightenment is a mental state that is attainable during this life or at death, where the mind is completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. It's a permanent mental state where the mind is unshakable. It's steady and stable. The mind is experiencing relaxed state and calm, but yet the mind is attentive and alert. Oftentimes when we think relaxed and calm, we think like vegging out, right? That's kind of like what we think about, but that's not what the enlightened mind is experiencing. I mean, you certainly will be relaxed in those kinds of situations, but the mind itself, it's relaxed and calm, but it's attentive and alert. It's sharp, right? So this is very opposite of what people are typically used to. So the mind is no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. You will have eliminated all your anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All of that has been eliminated from the mind. The mind is performing optimally. It's focused, it's concentrated. You have clarity of mind and deep memory. So these are things that you'll notice as part of getting to the enlightened mental state. And an individual who's in the enlightened mental state, they have escaped out of the cycle of rebirth. Now, you guys heard from the beginning of the course, I shared with you, don't believe anything that I share, including the cycle of rebirth. Don't ever believe that this thing exists. But instead, as you journey on this path, there's ways for you to independently verify that the cycle of rebirth is true. Right now, you might be believing that you only have one life, but what you're going to be able to see as you journey on this path and you independently verify the teachings, that you'll be able to independently verify the cycle of rebirth is true. But that's not something you usually do right up front when you're first getting started. But when I'm talking about this topic of enlightenment, I need to talk about here and there, I need to just mention the cycle of rebirth because they're connected in terms of enlightenment and the cycle of rebirth. But I suggest you set that aside, the whole topic of the cycle of rebirth, when you're first getting started, and make sure you don't ever believe in it, but instead you independently verify whether it's true or false. So by the time someone gets to enlightenment and they die, they will no longer be reborn over and over and over and over again. They're outside of that cycle of rebirth. It's a permanent mental state that you're experiencing all the way through the rest of your life. What comes next for an enlightened being after death? The Buddha never describes that. He leaves it as an undeclared teaching. He actually says specifically in his teachings, he says, remember, what did I teach? I taught this. And he points to the Four Noble Truths. And then he says, remember what I did not teach. I did not teach this. And he gives you 10 things that he didn't teach. And one of the things that he didn't teach is what comes next for an enlightened being. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is so peaceful and so joyful, you're not going to care what's next. It doesn't matter, because if there is something that's next, it's either as good as what you're currently experiencing or better. And if there isn't anything next, okay, so be it. Then there's nothing next. So the teachings of the Buddha aren't about what comes next. It's not about an afterlife. It's not about doing a whole bunch of wonderful things now, and then you're going to get to this better life later. It's about getting to that better life now in this life. That's what the Buddha's guiding you to do. So if there's something next, and he described what that was, that's just one more thing that your mind's longing, yearning for. And you're like, wow, I can't wait to get to that thing. Well, that means you're not content and peaceful in the present moment. So you're basically stuck in this infinite loop that you're longing, yearning to get to that next thing, but you can't ever get to it because you're longing, yearning. Your mind is not yet enlightened, right? So the Buddha wisely didn't teach what does or doesn't come next. He just left it as an undeclared teaching. But by that time, your mind's so peaceful and joyful, it doesn't matter what's next because your mind's peaceful and joyful in the present moment. So this is a mental state that you're experiencing through freeing the mind of something called craving, anger, and ignorance. These are called the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots or the three fires. I'm going to talk about this on Wednesday morning so you guys can understand what these are, that you've purified the mind of craving, anger, and ignorance. You've realized non-self and you've eliminated the ego. You'll be practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, which are the wholesome roots, which are the exact opposites of these, which you'll understand more by Wednesday. So enlightenment is a mental state. The path to enlightenment is a purification of the mind, where you're purifying the mind of the pollutions that are hindering you from being able to get to enlightenment. The Buddha discovered these 10 individual pollutions in the mind. They're referred to as the 10 fetters, and I'm going to introduce them to you here in a bit so you can see what they actually are. And he figured out how to purify the mind, how to get rid of those pollutions, and that's what's actually producing enlightenment. So while we call it attaining enlightenment, and that's oftentimes the way we talk about it, one of the ways to think about it is your mind is already enlightened. The mind's already enlightened, but there's these pollutions that are in the way that are hindering you from being able to experience it. It's kind of like if there was the sun and then there's the clouds in front of the sun. As you peel away the clouds, the rays of the sun are shining through more and more and more. But the only difference in this analogy is that when you're getting rid of the pollution from the mind, it never comes back. Where with the sun, the clouds are eventually going to come back again, right? So sometimes people think about it as the mind is already enlightened. And this is actually a better analogy because as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, you're going to see the qualities of enlightenment starting to shine through more and more and more. So it's not like there's an instantaneous moment where you get to enlightenment. It's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And those qualities of enlightenment start shining through the mind more and more and more as you're getting these pollutions out of the way. Some people will describe enlightenment as happiness or ultimate bliss. I tend to not describe it this way because even though there's plenty of happiness in the enlightened mental state, it's unconditioned happiness, which the unenlightened mind is typically unfamiliar with. You understand what's called conditional happiness. What conditional happiness is based on some condition, you are then going to be happy. If your boss gave you a raise, maybe $20,000 a year more, you're like, whoa, I'm happy on the condition that I got a raise. Or you wake up in the morning and you see it's sunny outside, you get really happy. Right? This is conditional happiness. Or maybe some other thing happens in your life. Maybe you buy a brand new car, and based on the fact that you have this brand new car, you are now happy. That's a conditional happiness. There needs to be some condition met in order for there to be happiness. The enlightened mental state is beyond this. You're not experiencing conditional happiness anymore by the time you get to enlightenment. You're experiencing unconditional mental state of happiness where the mind is always cheerful, always bright, always glad, always uplifted. And this is different than what most people are used to. There's some people that describe enlightenment as happiness or ultimate bliss. And what they're typically experiencing and what they might be describing is what's called the jhanas. What a jhana is a preliminary phases that the mind goes through before you get to the first stage of enlightenment. There's 4 preliminary phases that the mind goes through. And there's these enhanced qualities of mind that you experience when you're moving through these jhanas. And when you get into the first jhana, there can be this bliss. There can be this excitement that comes into the mind. And it's like night and day compared to when you were off the path to enlightenment to when you're actually experiencing the jhanas. And oftentimes people, when they get into the jhanas, it's so impressive in terms of what you experience that people oftentimes think that they're enlightened. And they'll describe what they're experiencing as enlightenment. But what they're really describing is the jhanas. They're describing this ultimate bliss that they're experiencing. This is where sometimes people will tell you that enlightened beings still get sad, or still get angry or still get frustrated. If that's the case, those people aren't enlightened, because enlightened beings don't experience those feelings. But if you're in the jhanas, experiencing these enhanced qualities of mind, thinking that you're enlightened, but yet you're still experiencing anger and sadness and all these other discontent feelings, you'll describe what you're experiencing as enlightenment, and you'll say that enlightened beings still get angry and frustrated. I can assure you that that's not the case. Enlightened beings don't experience those things anymore. So I don't describe enlightenment as happiness or ultimate bliss, even though there's plenty of happiness, way more happiness than in the unenlightened state. Because in the unenlightened state, you can only be happy when things are going your way. When things aren't going your way, the mind's not happy any longer. But for the enlightened being, you can be happy no matter what's going on in your day-to-day life. So this is how I describe enlightenment: as a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. And this is a permanent mental state. These are mental qualities that you're experiencing at all times. You wake up peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. All day long, peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. You go to sleep, peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. The mind is just always in that mental state. There's no condition that is producing it. In terms of the advantages of getting to enlightenment is, yes, the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. That's a wonderful mental state to be in all the time. You'll notice that you have a high degree of focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory. So if there's certain things in your life that you're interested in doing, your mind will be performing optimally, and you can accomplish all those things. Maybe you're interested in learning how to fly a helicopter, but you never had the confidence that you could do it because maybe your mind wasn't performing so well. Maybe now you'd like to go out and learn how to fly a helicopter, right? You'll have the ability to do that because your mind's focused, concentrated, have clarity and deep memory. Or maybe you'd like to start your own business or something like that. You'll have the ability to do that because your mind is focused and concentrated. You'll notice that you won't have any of these discontent feelings any longer. So you won't have that bitterness and harshness and hostility. You'll have all this time back in your life, because if you think about your life, think about all the times you've been irritated and grumpy and frustrated and arguing and angry at people and just sitting around being frustrated and disgruntled. That takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to do that. So you're going to get all that back because now you're not experiencing those kinds of things anymore, and you'll have time to actually dedicate to the things that you enjoy. You'll notice that you have deep wisdom about the world around you that other people don't actually have. This is where you need to make sure you don't have conceit, where you're not being arrogant and prideful, but you're going to have wisdom where things are just so simple and so easy for you, so straightforward, that you're not having struggles and difficulties anymore. Where in the unenlightened state, you'll have certain struggles and difficulties. You'll notice that you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to everybody and anybody. Where right now that might be challenging for you. In certain situations, you can probably be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, but in other situations, you might find that very difficult. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to everybody. So because of that, you'll notice that your personal and professional relationships are really blossoming. Because in the unenlightened state, when you're being bitter and harsh and hostile to people, that's damaging your relationships, and it's all going to just come back to you. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you'll be completely polite, kind, friendly, respectful to everybody. And over a consistent long-term period, more and more people will be treating you that way as well. So your relationships will be at ease. They'll be harmonious. They'll really be blossoming. You'll get to the point where you're not even in a bad mood anymore, that it's physically impossible for you to experience a bad mood by the time you get to enlightenment, because you've uprooted the pollutions. You've uprooted the causes and conditions that are producing that. The way that you get to enlightenment is you start out with these core central teachings. So you're going to be pretty much learning all of these as part of this course. You would like to start out with the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, and the 5 precepts. I'm going to teach you all of those things in a way that you can independently verify as part of this course. Then you would like to learn the Brahma Viharas. These are 4 healthy mental states that are going to actually antidote certain symptoms in your mind. This is where the Buddha gets the reputation of being like a doctor, that there's certain symptoms in the mind, and then there's a certain prescription or an antidote that he's giving you to be able to remedy that. So I'm not going to actually teach the Brahma Viharas as part of this course. I teach it in the next course, which is coming up in 2 weeks. It's called Harmony in Relationships. I teach it in there, but it's also in this book. It's in chapter 14, but I will kind of reference the Brahma Viharas as part of this course, but it's the next course that I really focus on that. Then the 10 fetters, I'm about to introduce you to those here in a moment. There's the 7 factors of enlightenment, and there's extensive meditation training that you're going to need. There's teachings beyond this that you need to be able to get to enlightenment, but this is where you start. This is like the core central teachings to really get started. And when you're learning these, as I shared with you, you're learning, examining, and investigating. You're reflecting to verify if it's true or false, and then you're practicing, integrating it into your day-to-day life. Never believe any of the teachings whatsoever. This path is not about believing a bunch of things and hoping something good happens when you die. It's about learning, growing, and developing in this life, getting to the ideal life in this life. So this is how you would attain enlightenment. Do you guys have any questions on anything I'm sharing so far about what enlightenment is, the advantages of it, or how to attain it? No questions? Okay, let me check online here. Welcome to everybody online. Okay, I don't see any questions here either. All right, so now I'm going to introduce you to the 10 fetters. These are the 10 pollutions of the mind that the Buddha discovered, and everything that he's teaching you in one way or another is coming back to helping you to eliminate these out of the mind, because you need to uproot these out of the mind. So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to these, because everything that I'm going to teach you in this entire course is helping you to eliminate these. But then in the future, you're going to actually need to know these in a lot more detail than what I'm sharing with you today. Today is just like a little introduction to them, where in other courses and retreats, I might spend an hour to an hour and a half on each individual one of these, where today I'll maybe just spend a couple of minutes talking about each one. So this first one, personal existence view, this is something we're going to talk about in more detail tomorrow. What this is where the mind's clinging to the body or the mind, thinking that this is who you are as a person, and now the mind wants to be perceived by others in a certain way. The mind's confused. It has a misunderstanding where it thinks that this body is you, this self-image is you, or this mind, this self-identity is you. So for example, if you've ever been in a social situation and you spilled something on your clothing and you got embarrassed in that situation, that's your personal existence view. The mind is clinging to this body, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way, and you can only be comfortable if people are perceiving you the way you want to be perceived. Or if you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle or a mole or a pimple or a gray hair, or you start losing your hair, or maybe you start gaining some weight, you might be shaken up by that. That's your mind clinging to this body, wanting others to perceive you in a certain way. Or say your self-identity. You might have an identity like I am American, or I am Lithuanian, or I am Chinese, or I am a Brit, or I am Colombian, or any of this I am, around your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your job or occupation. You can cling to any number of things of who you think you are as a person. And now let's just say you're sitting at a restaurant and 2 tables over, someone says, all Americans are lovely and kind and warm and gentle. I've never heard this before, but maybe you could hear this at some point, right? That maybe somebody would say this and you'd be like, whoa, I'm American. Wow, they're talking about me, right? But now maybe 2 tables over, somebody says something degrading or disparaging or disrespectful, and now you're angry or frustrated. So as long as you have this personal existence view in your mind where you're holding on to this identity of who you think you are as a person, your mind can easily be shaken up. So this is just a little bit about personal existence view, but we'll go into that in more detail tomorrow. Then there's something called doubt. What doubt is where you have doubt about the teachings and the ability of them to actually attain enlightenment. When people typically come to the path to enlightenment, they have doubt. So if you have doubt, it's normal. That's fine, right? But you don't eliminate this doubt through blind belief or faith or anything like that. The way you eliminate your doubt about the teachings is you investigate and examine the teachings. By investigating and examining the teachings, you reflect on them to verify if they're true or false, and then you practice the teachings. Then you'll see the improvement to the condition of your mind in your life. And then eventually you get to the point where you have no doubt that these teachings are actually working to improve your mind in your life. So there's never a time where you should have belief or faith or anything like that. It's about learning, examining, and investigating. And ultimately, you'll get to the point where you have confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community that you're part of, confidence in your teacher, and confidence in your own ability to get to enlightenment, because you see that it's happening. You're getting closer and closer to it, and you can see your mind's improving. So that doubt is eliminated through investigation and examination of the teachings. You can actually harness this doubt, right? If you have doubt right now, which I'm sure you do, because you haven't studied the teachings, how could you have confidence in something if you don't even know what those things are? If you have doubt, you can harness this. You can actually turn it into an inquisitive mind. You can just admit to yourself that you have doubt and then be like, you know what? Yeah, I doubt the teachings of the Buddha. This isn't the way I think now, but I'm speaking as if I'm you. Yeah, I doubt the teachings of the Buddha. You know what? I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to sink my teeth in, and I'm going to figure out if these teachings actually lead to enlightenment. And that's where you can eliminate your actual doubt. And you can actually harness it to turn it into an inquisitive mind. Then there's something called wrong behavior and observances. There's two sides to this. Wrong behavior is that as an unenlightened being, there's going to be certain unwise moral conduct, unwholesome moral conduct that you have that is producing harm in the world. And as you put out that harm is coming back to you. So by the time you've eliminated this portion of the fetter, you've improved your moral conduct to a certain degree based on the Eightfold Path that I'm going to teach you tomorrow. The Buddha's moral conduct isn't rules or commandments, but instead he's showing you the cause and effect relationship of how you're making decisions about your moral conduct and what you're experiencing coming back to you. Because if you keep putting out harm through your moral conduct, then harm is just going to keep coming back to you. And how could you get to peace and joy if you keep experiencing this harm coming back to you over and over and over again? So it's kind of like if you had an oil pipe and this oil pipe had busted and it was spewing oil all over the world. Well, you're not going to go clean up the oil on the floor first. You're going to shut down the oil pipe and make sure that it's not spewing oil all over the world. So it's the same thing that the Buddha is teaching you to improve this moral conduct so that you're not putting harm out into the world so that harm doesn't keep coming back to you. So there's moral conduct that I'm going to be teaching you as part of this course so that you can see what are the unwise decisions that are leading to unwholesome results, and you can see the wise decisions that lead to wholesome results in your day-to-day life in the way that you interact with people. And these are things that you'll be able to independently verify. The wrong observances part, this is where somebody might think that rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, things of this nature is going to lead to some kind of beneficial results in your life. And people might be going to those kind of places thinking that somehow this is going to help them in their life. So someone might be going to a temple to have someone sprinkle water on you. And they think if this person sprinkles water on you, that your life's going to magically get better. Or if you eat this wafer, somehow this is going to help your life to get better. Or if you light these incense, any number of different rituals. I saw one online just yesterday where people lay in this coffin. They actually are alive and they lay in this coffin and they think it's going to actually help them to live longer if they confront death. And now they lay in this coffin and as they lay in the coffin, they're kind of cheating death, because now they get out of the coffin and now they're going to live for a longer period of time. There's all these different rituals like this that people in their minds, they think that it's going to produce some kind of beneficial result. So whether you choose to do these things or not, it's a choice for you to make. The Buddha's never telling you what you should or shouldn't do because you're an adult. You make your own choices in life. But what he's teaching you is that if you are doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, or prayer in your mind, if you think that these are the things that are going to lead to improvement in your life, then you're not understanding the number one problem that he discovered. The number one problem that he discovered is the mind has a lack of wisdom, that it just doesn't understand these natural laws. And there's no amount of water that I can sprinkle on you that's going to help you cultivate wisdom. So whether an individual does these things or not, it's a choice for them to make. Maybe you're with a family member or you're a group of family members and you're going out on a social event, and maybe they'd like to stop by the church or the synagogue or the mosque or the temple, and they like to do some rituals, and maybe that's what they're doing. And maybe you just go along with everybody, and maybe you're standing there with them singing or whatever it is, but then afterwards you guys are going out to some event. As long as your mind understands that this isn't what leads to enlightenment, then you've eliminated wrong observances. And oftentimes before people people even come to study with me, they've actually already eliminated this out of their mind because they know that I don't do rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, and things of this nature. So that's one of the reasons why they come to study here. So maybe you've done a lot of those things in other places, and you can see that your mind still gets angry. You still get frustrated. You still have difficulties and struggles in your day-to-day life. The thing that's going to eliminate those difficulties and struggles is wisdom. And there's no amount of rituals that I can do that's going to help you to cultivate wisdom. So that's why the Buddha never did any of these rituals. If you see those things associated with the teachings of the Buddha, those are misunderstandings that people are having. Then there's something called sensual desire. Sensual desire is how the mind longs and yearns through your sense bases for permanently agreeable contact. And if you get agreeable contact, you'll get pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, and others. But if you have disagreeable contact, you'll get painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, or others. So for example, the 6 sense bases are your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. If you're at a stoplight and you hear a certain music that you actually listen to, someone's pulled up to you with that music, you might be in your chair in the stoplight dancing, having a good old time, like, wow, that's my jam. All right, let's go. Come on, let's party, right? Party, 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 right? You're getting so happy because you're hearing in your ear something that is agreeable, a sound that is agreeable. But now you pull up to the next traffic light, and now you hear a different type of music, and you don't listen to this kind of music. And now you're frustrated or angry or irritated. This is your sensual desire. The mind is longing, yearning through your sense bases, craving permanently agreeable contact. And you can only be happy when you have agreeable contact through your sense bases. Here's another example. Say you're walking down the street and you're in front of a flower shop and you smell the flowers coming out. It's like, oh my gosh, that smells amazing. I could stand here and smell that all day long. Wow, that's an odor going through your nose that you're now forming conditioned pleasant feelings about. But then you walk a few more steps and you get a whiff of the sewer. And it's like, oh, you're repulsed by that. Right? That's the impermanent nature of the world. The world is impermanent. But with your mind's sensual desire, it will have a craving for permanently agreeable contact. And you can only be happy when the mind's getting what it wants and what it expects. And now when you're having this disagreeable contact, there's frustration and agitation and annoyance in the mind. So this is called sensual desire. And this is happening through all the 6 sense bases. Then when your mind is getting what it wants, again, it's happy. But when it's not getting what it wants, there's this anger and frustration, this bitterness and hostility that is arising. That's the ill will. That hostility, the hatred, the anger, the resentment coming into the mind, even the slightest little annoyance. This is the ill will that the mind has. And typically when this ill will is arising, people attribute it to something external. You might think it's your parents that are causing this, or your brothers and sisters, or your life partner, but it's actually coming from your own mind. And now you'll become unskillful. What you'll tend to do is push people away. You'll be bitter, harsh, and hostile with them, or you'll put your expectations on them and try to control them and pressure them to do things your way. And people might be doing this to you too. And it's coming from this ill will. The mind is experiencing this. That person who pulls up with the music that you don't listen to, you might roll down your window and talk bad to them, or give them the middle finger, or be grumpy or irritable to them. It's motivating unskillful conduct. And now this ill will that's motivating unskillful conduct, you're going to cause harm through that, and now harm is going to come back to you. So these are the first 5 fetters. These are the lower fetters. And we refer to them as fetters because during the lifetime of the Buddha, if you were someone that they were trying to keep confined to a certain area, they would attach a fetter around your ankle. What a fetter is a shackle and a chain and a ball, and it would keep you trapped in this area. They would just keep you in this open field. Where today we put prisoners in jail cells or prison cells, where during the lifetime of the Buddha, they attached a fetter around your ankle. So when he describes these individual pollutions, he calls them fetters because it's keeping the mind trapped in this unenlightened state, experiencing these discontent feelings over and over and over and over again. But just like a prisoner, if you release that fetter off of their ankle and they're now free, the same thing is true. When you eliminate all the 10 fetters, your mind is free. Because when you have these pollutions in your mind, the mind is bound up. It's congested. When you're experiencing stress and anxiety and all those other feelings, your mind's not free. You're experiencing those feelings. So do you guys have questions on the first 5 here? Anything you'd like to ask? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, David. What comes to my mind about the behavior? So I went to an event before in China. So they were talking about the death, and then they asked the people to giving some chanting during the death people, and then encourage people to join the chanting for the death, and then they can go to the pure land or maybe close to the pure land. And what's the explanation for this? Is it different between enlightenment and the pure land?
So the Buddha never taught that. That's a big misunderstanding. They call it Pure Land Buddhism. They think that your goal is to do all these things in this life, and then when you die, you're going to go to this pure land and be with the Buddha, right? So it's basically taking Christian teachings and imposing Buddhist ideas onto Christian teachings and modifying what the Buddha taught. He never taught those kinds of things. So anything you heard about that is not actually true. That's not what the Buddha actually taught.
Okay, so that's not the Buddha's taught. It's like mislead.
Yeah, it's misunderstanding that he taught you to get to a wonderful life now in this existence, not to long and yearn for this pure land Buddhism or this pure land of Buddhas. That's what they think. I can show you the original words of the Buddha, and I have it in the book series if you like, where he actually says that he never taught what comes next for an enlightened being. So people that are teaching those kinds of things, they haven't studied the original teachings of the Buddha to be able to see that he never taught that kind of stuff.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now I'll teach you guys the higher fetters. These are another 5, and I'm going to talk about numbers 6 and 7 together because they're very similar. What this is desire for form and desire for formless, where the individual has a desire to exist in one of the realms of hell realm, the animal realm, afflicted spirits, the human realm, or the heavenly realm. And again, I realize I'm talking about the cycle of rebirth here and the 5 realms of existence. And I taught you guys not to believe anything. Don't believe this either, because you can actually independently verify this. But it's not something you do right up front when you're first getting started. But some people can have a craving or a longing or a yearning to exist in one of these realms. And that means they're not content in the present moment. Their mind is longing, yearning for existence in another place, like the pure land, right? So if somebody has that longing, yearning, that means that they're not currently content and peaceful in the present moment. So there's people that have a longing, yearning to be in the animal realm, for example. I know I did. I used to be interested in being a bird. I was like, wow, it'd be so cool to fly around and look at people and be able to go wherever I'd like. And I thought that would be so cool to be a bird, right? So if someone has a craving for existence in another realm or even in this realm, that means they're not understanding impermanence, that this existence is not permanent. And same thing, people can have a craving to exist in the human realm. And if you do, death is going to be very painful. When it gets closer and closer to death, you're holding on to this life and you don't want to let go. It's going to be very painful for you. And you might even fear death as well. Or some people might have a craving to exist in hell or afflicted spirits, which are ghosts, or the heavenly realm. Now, most people have a longing, yearning for heaven. That's what you hear most often. But there are some people that have a craving to exist in hell, or even as a ghost or something of that nature. So by the time you eliminate this, you will no longer have a craving for existence, but you won't have craving for non-existence either, because craving for non-existence would be to be interested in killing yourself, right? That you don't want to be in existence. So you need to get to the middle where you understand you're in this existence and now you've become content and joyful, understanding that yes, there is this existence, but your mind's not longing, yearning for existence, and you're not longing, yearning for non-existence either. And by the time you eliminate these two fetters out of the mind, you won't have any fear of death, that you will have eliminated that from your mind. Where right now you might have a certain fear of death, but by the time you eliminate these, you won't have that. Then there's something called conceit. Conceit is where the mind is measuring and comparing yourself to other people, putting yourself above people or putting yourself below people. And now you will talk down to some people and you will talk up to other people. And this causes the mind to have difficulties and struggles, because when you go into a social situation, your mind's constantly trying to figure out who's above me and who's below me, because you talk to one group of people one way and another group of people another way. And there's arrogance and pride here, and you can't just love people as they are. You're constantly measuring and comparing yourself. So if you put yourself above people, that means you also put yourself below people. And that's just as dangerous for you. Because if you go into your boss's office and you think that they're above you and you're all shaken up by being around your boss, now you're not going to be able to perform professionally. And it's going to hinder your career and your development in your professional life. So you'd like to get to the point where your mind's not putting yourself above people or below people. So that way you can just treat everybody equally. You can treat everybody the same. You're outside and you see a person sweeping the street. Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. Good morning. How are you? But then you see the king of Thailand or the queen of Thailand walking down the street. Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. How are you? Nice to see you. You just treat everybody the same. And now your mind can be at ease because you're just being polite, kind, friendly, respectful to everybody, rather than having to constantly switch in your mind from one type of moral conduct to another. Where this conceit is coming from is our animal existences. When we were in the animal realm, we had to have conceit. Without conceit, we wouldn't have actually survived. We needed this pecking order, that we needed to know as a pack of wolves, who's the alpha male, who's the alpha female, because they're teaching us how to hunt. And if it wasn't for us learning that, we wouldn't have survived as wolves. Or as a herd of elephants, we needed to know who's the matriarch of our herd, because she's showing us where the food is, the watering holes, the migration paths. If we didn't understand who was above us in our elephant herd, we wouldn't have survived as an elephant. We would have just been roaming around, not knowing where the food was and where the watering holes were and where the migration paths were. So the conceit in our mind is from our animal existences, that it comes into this human existence and we actually don't need it here, but our mind retains it. So you need to get to the point where you're not measuring and comparing people and putting yourself above them or below them. And you just see everybody as being equal. And there's certain training that will help you to do that. Then there's something called restlessness in the mind, where the mind can be overactive. If you've ever sat somewhere and you just kind of like bob your knee, or you tap your foot, or tap your finger, or tap a pencil, that's the restlessness in the mind, and it's coming out through your body, and you can actually eliminate that. Or if you've ever had like obsessive thoughts, where your mind just keeps thinking this same thoughts over and over and over and over again, and you can't get it out of your head, that's the restlessness in the mind. So there's ways for you to eliminate that. And as long as you have that, your mind's not going to be peaceful. It's not going to be joyful. So the Buddha teaches you how to get rid of that. Then the fetter of all fetters is called ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom, the confusion and misunderstanding that the mind has. Now, some people refer to it as ignorance, and I use that to be able to help people relate what they've seen in other places to what I'm sharing with you. But the Buddha would have never used that word. That's a derogatory and degrading word. He would never refer to someone as ignorant or stupid or a fool. Instead, he would have used language like the unknowing of true reality, or confusion, or lack of wisdom, or misunderstanding, or misperception, that the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. For example, in the unenlightened state, we firmly believe that it's other people who are causing us to be angry and frustrated, because we haven't cultivated wisdom to be able to see otherwise. But it's when you learn these teachings and you don't believe them that you can actually see the truth, that it's your own mind that's causing these feelings. But as long as you have that lack of wisdom, the mind will stay stuck, right? So the lack of wisdom that the mind has is the lack of wisdom of things like the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the natural law of Gotama, meditation training. The mind lacks wisdom about the 10 fetters, doesn't even know that these 10 fetters exist in the mind. has no idea that these things even exist. That's the lack of wisdom that the mind has. So the way that you eliminate this is through cultivation of wisdom. And that's why you never believe any of the teachings of the Buddha. You can't get to enlightenment through belief, because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing it because someone convinced you to believe it, or you convinced yourself to believe it. But you've got to get to wisdom where you can see the truth. That way you can get rid of all these false beliefs and bring in this wisdom that now you can make wise decisions in your day-to-day life. So these are the higher fetters. And this ignorance is the kind of the fetter of all fetters. This is the dirtiest, most horrible pollution of the mind. That as long as this is in there, everything else is going to stay stuck. So do you guys have any questions here on this? Yes, sir.
Kick in? Oh, it did.
Mm-hmm.
Question about conceit, and not so much the comparing of superior versus inferior, but more from an enlightened perspective. How do you navigate liking certain people more than others? Like, does that become an equal footing as well, or are there still people that you naturally gravitate towards versus wanting to not necessarily repel, but kind of stay away from?
Yeah, by the time you get to enlightenment, you will have that like and dislike in your mind. Right now, if someone meets your expectations and they do things your way, you'll like them. But if they don't meet your expectations and do things your way, you'll dislike them. That dislike is coming from your own mind. And by the time you get rid of that, you'll understand that everybody's doing things differently. And this is just impermanence. And while you might disagree with the choices and decisions this person makes, you can still love them as a person. And you don't have that repulsion towards them. And you'll still, as an enlightened being, you'll prefer to be around people who are polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. But your mind won't be discontent when you're around someone who's disrespectful or arrogant or prideful. Your mind can just understand, okay, that's where that person's mind is, and you're just choosing to spend time with other people. But you're not repulsed by them and you're not discontent being around them. It's just that you're making wise choices of who to spend time with. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. By the way, those microphones back there actually are much better. They're on a different frequency and they actually are a lot clearer.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a part of the world where I got to work with people from different cultures, different parts of the world. They come to work in Dubai, and one constant experience that affected me a lot as a person of color was discrimination, especially at the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And it was outward, blatant discrimination, so it's not something that I was imagining. Perhaps at the beginning I would give it the benefit of the doubt, but it was very obvious after a certain point of time because of the situations that I've been in. And how do I reconcile that, all of those experiences, with the concept of non-self? Because at some level, I was so affected by it that I think it affected my performance at the workplace. I was always a go-getter, and that changed completely because of all these experiences, to the point where now, long story short, I've taken a break from the corporate, way of life, and I'm on an extended break. So how do I reconcile all of that with the concept of non-self? This is with respect to the first fetter.
Sure. So the teaching of non-self is actually what's going to help you to get rid of that frustration and agitation. Because as long as you walk around with personal existence view, as things are happening in your day-to-day life, whether it is or isn't attributed to your ethnicity or your physical appearance or any of that, your mind will tend to look at it in that way. Because I'm sure you've encountered discrimination, because we all have. Even me as a white male, I've experienced discrimination. We experience that. But when you have a really strong personal existence view, even when things aren't related to that, you'll tend to attribute it to that. So if you get rid of the personal existence view, your mind can be more at ease, and you won't have the overwhelming frustration in those situations. And now you can just make wise decisions to be able to move your life forward. And if that includes no longer working for this company because maybe there's rampant discrimination, then that's a choice that you have the ability to make. That's the natural law of karma. That one of the things the Buddha teaches you to do is to use discernment or wise decision making. And if you're part of an organization where there's rampant discrimination and you know that's the case and you can't progress in your career because of that, now you would most likely decide to move and go to another place. And now you can continue your career amongst people who don't have that rampant discrimination. And that would be a wise decision in that situation. But the mind will oftentimes cling to this over here. Maybe it's a certain office, certain coworkers, certain salary, certain living environment, and it'll cling to it and won't want to let it go. But if you let this go, and now you understand change is normal, and now you can change and go over here, you can have a more fulfilling career. So that would be the advice that I would give somebody is to, if there's truly rampant discrimination and it's hindering your growth and development in your career or as a person, it's best to leave that situation and go somewhere else. But now you still need to work on eliminating that personal existence view to realize non-self, so that you don't hold that on the sleeve of your wrist. And every time somebody says something unwise or disrespectful, that you automatically attribute it to your ethnicity or your gender or anything like that. So when you get rid of that personal existence view, it'll allow you to see through that and not necessarily have so much disgruntledness and frustration when people are saying things or doing things in these environments. Okay, so I don't see any other questions here. So now we'll talk about the 4 stages of enlightenment, just kind of introducing you to these, because as you're eliminating the 10 fetters, your mind's going to be moving through these 4 stages of enlightenment. The Buddha refers to them as stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and arahant, but we usually refer to them as the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stage of enlightenment. But it does help you to understand how the Buddha referred to them, because there's meaning behind each one of these things. So for example, the stream enterer, the 1st stage of enlightenment, the reason why he calls it a stream enterer is because just like the log enters the stream and you're going to eventually get to the ocean, the same thing is true about the 1st stage of enlightenment, that once you get to the 1st stage of enlightenment, you're going to eventually get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time. So these names actually do have purposes, and it's helpful to know them. But in shorthand, we usually refer to them as just the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stage of enlightenment. And then there's something called a Buddha, which is not a stage of enlightenment. And I'll explain to you what this is. Okay. So the 1st stage of enlightenment is a stream enterer. Once you get to this stage of enlightenment, you will have eliminated the 3 fetters, the 1st one, 2nd, and 3rd, personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. And your mind's experiencing a significant decrease of discontentedness. The discontentedness that you once experienced when you were off the path to enlightenment to when you're in the 1st stage of enlightenment, it's like night and day. You're still not enlightened yet, but your mind is experiencing a significant decrease of discontentedness because you've eliminated these first 3 fetters. If you die in this stage of enlightenment, you will come back into the world no more than 7 times before you get to enlightenment. Again, I realize I'm talking about the cycle of rebirth, but you can just set that aside and just note that, yes, this is what David's explaining. This is what the Buddha taught. And then in the future, when you verify this, then you'll know that this is true. Okay? So if you die in the stage of enlightenment, you're going to come back, but you're never going to regress. Your mind will not regress backwards. So if you get to the 1st stage of enlightenment in this life, your mind will firmly be in that stage of enlightenment for the rest of this life. Your mind can't regress backwards. But then when you're reborn, you're not reborn back into the 1st stage of enlightenment. You're going to be reborn as an infant and you're going to lack wisdom, but you're going to more readily make your way back to the teachings of the Buddha. So some of you guys might have actually been stream enterers in your previous life. And now this is your opportunity to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment. So we call it a stream enterer because once you get to the 1st stage of enlightenment, there's no regression. You can't go backwards. It's only forward progress where you're going to eventually get to the ocean. You're going to eventually get to enlightenment. Then there's the 2nd stage of enlightenment. This is called a once returner. This individual has already eliminated the first 3 fetters, but they've thinned out number 4 and 5. Thinning out a fetter means that it's not as prominent as it once was. If you can think about when you were a teenager, you might have had a lot of anger and hostility in your mind, but then as you've aged, that's kind of dissipated to a certain degree. That's what it means to thin out a fetter. Okay, so an individual who's in the second stage of enlightenment would have thinned out sensual desire and ill will. It's not as strong as it once was. And again, this person is also experiencing a decrease in discontentedness. If somebody dies in this stage of enlightenment, they will come back into this world one more time, and they will actually get to enlightenment in that next life. So you might have actually been a once returner in your previous life, and now is your opportunity to be able to get to enlightenment. Then there's something called a non-returner. A non-returner has eliminated the 5 lower fetters, and this individual is experiencing very insignificant and very infrequent discontentedness. Maybe once every 3 months, once every 6 months, they're getting a little bit discontent. It's very infrequent and very insignificant when it occurs. In fact, the people around you probably won't even know that you're discontent, because it's just like a few seconds internally within your own mind, and you can stamp it out and cut it out right away. So in this particular stage of enlightenment, you need to be very diligent and dedicated, because you can be somewhat complacent, because your mind is performing so well at this point, not as well as it will when you're enlightened, but it's performing so well that you're really not having very many hiccups in your day-to-day life. So you need to stay dedicated and committed to getting rid of all of those cravings, desires, attachments, and these other fetters. If you die in this stage of enlightenment, you will be reborn into the heavenly world, and you will get to enlightenment in that life. That's why it's called a non-returner, because you're not coming back to this particular human world. Then if you get to the point where you've eliminated all the 10 fetters, during the lifetime of the Buddha, they refer to this as an arahant. This is someone who's completely purified their mind. Today we would call this an enlightened being, that this individual has completely purified their mind. They don't experience any discontentedness whatsoever. It'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's no discontentedness in the mind whatsoever. And you'll know that your mind is enlightened, because you'll see that experience that is occurring for you. So what happens next for this individual is, we know that they don't experience rebirth in the cycle of rebirth, but what may or may not come next, the Buddha leaves it as an undeclared teaching. There's no teaching that he says what does come next or what doesn't come next. So if you ever see anybody that talks about those things, you know that it's not true. And you can see it in his original teachings that he talks about this in his original words. So this is an enlightened being. This is an arahant, someone who's completely purified their mind and is experiencing complete peace and complete joy. Then there's something called a Buddha. A Buddha is an arahant. They've completely purified their mind, but they've done it in a unique way, that they've done it without any teachers or any guides. This type of individual is very rare in the world. The last one that the world currently is aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. Everybody else who gets to enlightenment, they're going to need teachers and guides to be able to help them. But an individual who can do this by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, they meet the first criteria of being a Buddha. Then that individual will then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people will get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. Then the third criteria is that they will preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. So this is the 3 criteria of what make a Buddha a Buddha. They get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people will get to enlightenment. Then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. There's also these other criteria too, is that they have a deep, profound memory. Even in the unenlightened state, they have a deep, profound memory. This is how they get to enlightenment without the help of any teachers or any guides, that they accumulate a bunch of wisdom from their current life in their previous lives too, and they put all that wisdom together to be able to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. So they have an unlimited capacity to remember countless details about their current life and their previous lives, where, for example, your mind has a limited capacity. It's kind of like a hard drive that maybe you have 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte. And now, in the last 5 or 10 years, you remember pretty much everything that you've been up to. But if you think back to your childhood, you just have spotty memories. because it's like a hard drive. You've reached capacity, and now you've had to delete old files in order to store new files. That's why you just have a limited spotty memories of your childhood. Where an individual who's going to become a Buddha, they don't have that. They remember countless details about their previous life and their past lives as well. And then they can quickly determine the condition of someone's mind just by spending time with them. And now when they spend time with them and they observe their mind, they can actually offer them teachings that are going to help them to be able to overcome that. So essentially a Buddha can see the fetters in somebody else's mind by spending time with that person. And then they can help them to be able to get to enlightenment. This is why a Buddha can actually be so effective at helping countless people get to enlightenment, because they can observe the fetters in their students' minds. And then lastly, a Buddha is going to be a living, breathing, walking example of their teachings. Whatever they teach, they're going to be practicing those same things as well, because they understand that their students are learning from their spoken words, but they're learning just as much through their actions. And now they're helping their students to learn through their actions. So as they're practicing their teachings, their students are actually learning from them just through observing the way that they interact in the world. So these are the criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. And we refer to this person as a fully, perfectly enlightened one, right? The reason why is because if you get to enlightenment through learning with a teacher who's not a Buddha, that teacher has gotten to enlightenment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to guide you to enlightenment. And now when you're learning from that teacher, there's certain little extra baggage that you're learning. There's like maybe 5 or 10% of things that you're learning that doesn't lead to your enlightenment, but you're still doing those things. You're still enlightened. You're experiencing all the qualities that I'm talking about, but there might be a meditation here or there, or some other thing that you're doing that actually didn't contribute to your enlightenment, but you're still doing it. And now that individual will continue to do those things out of respect to their teachers. But an individual who's a Buddha, they actually don't have that. They don't have teachers. So if they try a certain meditation and it's working to improve the condition of their mind, they know this is the path to enlightenment. But if they do a certain meditation and it's not working, they will discard it. They will throw it away. So that's why we call them fully, perfectly enlightened, because they don't have any extra baggage. And by the time they get to enlightenment, they know the path inside and out, backwards and forwards. And they spend the rest of their life illuminating that path for everybody else so that they can see very clearly what it takes to actually lead to enlightenment. So this is why we refer to this type of person as a fully, perfectly enlightened one, because they don't have this extra baggage that the average enlightened being is going to have. So do you guys have any questions on the 4 stages of enlightenment or what a Buddha is? Yep. Sounds like it's still on.
Yeah. 2 questions I have. First one, without the guidance of teachers means without guidance of teachers and without scriptures? Or, I mean, like living teachers, or is the scriptures, like the teachings of the Buddha, is that a teacher also, kind of? You know? Because I was in some place, and as I understood, some forest monastery in Sri Lanka for a week or so, just recently. That's why it comes to my mind that the master there who was teaching us, he said that his master didn't have teachers, but he studied the scriptures and was practicing what he studied and could verify by himself and advance by himself.
In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need teachers and guides. The scriptures, while you're going to need to learn those are the original words of the Buddha. That by itself isn't going to allow you to get to enlightenment. If you took the Pali Canon and went off and actually studied it, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. So without knowing that person, I wouldn't be able to say for sure, but I suspect that person is not enlightened, that just read the scriptures, because they wouldn't have been able to get to enlightenment without any teachers or guides. So if they read the scriptures, okay, great, that's wonderful, but you're going to need teachers or guides, because there's certain things about the path to enlightenment that aren't in the scriptures. Because out of these 45 volumes of books, we don't have everything that the Buddha taught in those books, because we can see that there's certain things that he's referencing and he's talking about doing, but it's not in the Pali Canon anywhere. He's just referencing it. A great example of that is like loving kindness meditation. You can see multiple places where he references loving kindness meditation or the practice of loving kindness, but you'll never see anywhere that he actually teaches loving kindness meditation in the Pali Canon. Of course, he taught it during his life. Otherwise, people wouldn't have known how to do it. But it just never got documented in the Pali Canon, or at least the collection of teachings that we currently have. It's not in there. So the way that you learn this is you find a teacher who's actually eliminated their anger and hatred and ill will and all these other discontent feelings. And now whatever they're doing for loving kindness meditation, it worked for them, so it'll work for you too. So that's why you need a real live teacher, because you're going to have certain situations where you're trying to figure out how to apply the teachings in that situation, and you can't figure out how to apply it. So you're going to need a real live, living person, and you're going to need the words, the scriptures as well, but you're never interested in believing those, and you're going to need a teacher to guide you. But again, you're not believing that person either, but you're going to need that person to ask questions to and get help from. Like right now, you're asking questions, right? So you're not going to be able to get to this enlightened mental state without a teacher. Only a Buddha would be able to do that. And that's very rare in the world. The last Buddha that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, and that's the second question. That how can we be so perfectly sure that the last Buddha was the Buddha? I mean, how? Because you mentioned also, and I mean, at some other time you mentioned when I listened to your teachings that there is, I mean, some enlightened people, we don't know that they are enlightened. Some enlightened beings teach. Some are just doing their things, like before enlightenment, carrying water, chopping wood. After enlightenment, same thing and all. So how can we know?
By the time a Buddha dies, it'll be very apparent that they are a Buddha, because there's going to be a massive number of enlightened beings that exist in the world. And you don't see that anywhere in the world since the lifetime of the Buddha. There's never been a massive amount, countless people who actually have gotten to enlightenment. So a Buddha's teachings are so crisp, so clear, so concise, so wise that they're able to guide countless people to enlightenment. When they are in the world and they are teaching, it'll become more and more obvious that this person is a Buddha. So this Buddha, when he first started teaching, not everybody understood that he was a Buddha. But as he taught over 45 years and got closer and closer to death, more and more people were realizing that he was a Buddha, because there was countless people who were learning with him and countless people who were getting to enlightenment. And they knew they were enlightened because their mind had experienced that. And they knew that he didn't have any teachers or guides. So by the time a Buddha dies, it'll be very clear and very obvious for people that they are an actual Buddha. That's why now, today, people know, like, yes, he was the Buddha, because after his death, we know that he meets all three criteria. During the lifetime of a Buddha, they don't meet all three criteria yet. So people don't necessarily know, but there'll be some people who know that this person's a Buddha, but mostly people will know this person's a Buddha after they actually die. So because we know that he met all of these criteria, we can see that surely he was a Buddha, because he got to enlightenment by himself. He dedicated his life to sharing his teachings with countless people, and countless people got to enlightenment during his life. And then we can see that he preserved his teachings, and now there's still people that are getting to enlightenment based on his teachings, even today, 2,500 years later. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, those mics work a lot better. The frequency is different. You can see how much more clear they are. So it's the ones, is that the green one? Is that the green tape? Yeah, the ones with the green tape. They're much better quality. Okay, so what I usually do is here, I just kind of help you guys to understand how to know when you're not enlightened. This is one of my ways of teaching you, is I teach you what something is, and then I teach you what something is not. And by teaching you what something is not, it actually helps you understand what something is, right? So if your mind is experiencing conditioned feelings, then you know that your mind is not enlightened. And when I say conditioned feelings, it's all of these here. But sometimes when I teach this, and people are like, hold on a second, David, if I get to enlightenment, I'm not going to be happy anymore. I'm not going to experience excitement and all these other feelings. It's like, okay, let me help you to understand. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. These are conditioned feelings that you can only be happy when certain conditions are met. The weather is this, my mom and dad do this, my boss does this, my bank account is this, I have this kind of house, this kind of car, this kind of friends, this kind of that. then I will be happy. It's conditional, and your happiness actually shrinks. So you're going to be plenty happy by the time you get to enlightenment, but it's going to be unconditioned happiness. But if you're experiencing conditional feelings where you can only be happy when certain things occur, then you know that your mind is not enlightened. So if you're experiencing unconditional happiness, that's how you'll know that your mind is actually enlightened. The best way for me to explain this to you is, have you ever been somewhere where you're like maybe sitting somewhere and looking at a view or a landscape, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. I could just sit here all day. I don't need anything at all. I just feel completely relaxed and content just to sit here all day long. Have you ever had that experience? Yeah, where you just felt fully fulfilled, that you don't need anything else, right? We might call that temporary enlightenment, even though there's no such thing as temporary enlightenment. That might be what we call it, right? That you're just completely fulfilled. You're fully satisfied. Your mind wasn't longing, yearning for anything else. You were completely content in the present moment. That's what enlightenment is like, right? Where your mind is having unconditional happiness. You don't need anything else to feel happy. But that's not what an unenlightened being is experiencing. An unenlightened being can only experience conditional happiness. So these are the discontent feelings that we're going to talk about tomorrow. We'll discuss this some more. If you have a craving, desire to tell other people that you are enlightened, you are not yet enlightened. So if somebody rolls up to you and they're like, hey, by the way, don't tell anybody, I'm enlightened. You know right away that this person isn't enlightened, because an enlightened being doesn't go around bragging and boastful. It's kind of like, dude, if you're like so peaceful, go be peaceful, right? I mean, you're not going to necessarily say that to that person, but if somebody is truly enlightened, they're not going to go around and start bragging and being boastful and arrogant, the fact that they're enlightened, because they don't have conceit anymore. It's kind of like, hey, what do you want from me, dude? Do you want me to like bow down to you? Like, what do you want? What do you want? Why are you coming around here telling me that you're enlightened? I don't need to know that information, because as an enlightened being will be able to tell whether somebody else is enlightened or not. But an unenlightened being wouldn't actually be able to necessarily tell. But if somebody tells you that they're enlightened, you can be sure that they're not enlightened. So enlightenment isn't something that you're going to put on your Facebook page. You're not going to call your mom and be like, Mom, aren't you so proud of me? I'm enlightened. Yay. Right? You're not going to do those kinds of things. You'll just know for yourself. An enlightened being can walk down the street with wisdom and a smile. That's all you need. It's just the wisdom and a smile. And you can just confidently walk down the street knowing what you're experiencing in your mind and not trying to prove it to other people and not trying to convince other people that you're experiencing that mental state. So if you know somebody, or if you go around saying, I am enlightened, then you know that you're not enlightened. Okay. And then if you notice that your mind is complacent, where you're lacking motivation, you're lacking enthusiasm or ambition, you're lacking a willingness to do something, you don't have that vitality and that vigor in your mind, then you know that your mind is not enlightened. Because the mind in the unenlightened state can feel very dull and very lazy, where you're chasing, or your mind swings to the other side where you're feeling dull and lazy and lethargic. So if you're noticing that, then you know your mind's not enlightened. Okay? All right. So I'm going to stop here and take a lunch break for you guys. It's 20 minutes to 12. So we can take an hour and a half lunch break. We're actually taking a little bit of an earlier lunch break, so we'll probably finish up early today. So an hour and a half, that'll make that 1:10 that we'll get back, and we'll pick it up at 1:10. So enjoy your lunch break, and I'll see you guys afterwards. We're going to be discussing Buddhist chanting, and I hope you guys to learn what this is, the history of it, and how to make it useful for you during your meditation. So enjoy your lunch, and I'll see you guys afterwards. Okay? Mm-hmm. Sure.